with me, so we spend a lot of time together. He's one of my favorite InfoSec commentators. If you don't follow him on Twitter, it's awesome. If you have the pleasure of talking with him on Instant Messenger every day, it's even more awesomer because you get the unedited version. He's the only information security professional to serve in both World War I and World War II. His beard is older than all of our interns combined. He very likely has underwear older than you. And at his age, he does a lot more of IT than TCP. Mr. Jack Daniel, everyone!
So,
let me give you the mic. Yeah. Oh, which one?
I can bellow. We'll do this. So, thank you very much. Give me a second to organize myself here. So, yeah. If we could get slides rolling, that'd be sexy.
Oh, sorry.
All right, so here's a disclaimer. I'm doing this talk. Every couple of years I decide that I need to improve my presentation skills. So the way I do it is shame myself into it by giving a talk on giving better presentations. So this is not about you. That's the first thing. Your talk should always be about your audience. That's about me, because I'm going to shame myself, because the next 10...
Hang on, Jack. I got to run and get Adrian because his plan to stop that one slide blew up.
So anyway...
The HDMI did not work. It lost contact.
So anyway, there's a slide about this coming up.
But
actually, there's interesting issues that we have in information security and technology in general with presentations.
The slides are up there, but they're not
because if you read things like presentation Zen and slideology,
you gotta make sure they're both the same.
and those Zen-like things where you
that does work.
Yep.
You just gotta make sure these are the same. Though his refresh rate is weird, so his will come out odd.
Okay.
So
you need to fix that.
Yeah, next time someone comes up,
let's
just let him run it with it.
One of the slides that I will get to again later is that you should always be prepared for things to not go properly.
So it's got to be on his.
Huh?
We ready to roll?
Oh, we weren't rolling before?
I don't know, are we?
Well, we.
Actually, the only thing, if you're not quite doing your talk yet, actually this is probably in there anyway. Can you change this to 60 hertz or oh, never mind, you're doing zero mode.
Yep.
Just go.
Okay.
I'll try to see if I make it this little black on one side, and I'll see if I can do something in post.
Yeah, so, there's, so anyway, let's start. I know where we are. We are not in Texas, but the capital of Texas is where? Anybody know this? It's in Austin, not in Houston. Why is that? One reason is because of this woman, Angelina Eberly, and her pivotal role in the Archives War. What's the Archives War? Well, in the old days, old school big data, the seat of government was where all the documents were. And Sam Houston had a city named after himself, and he wanted that city to be the capital of the Republic of Texas. The way you made that happen was by moving the archives there. But the citizens of Austin weren't a fan of that, as were other people. So it was a big contentious thing. One night, an innkeeper named Angelina Eberly heard a commotion. And as was common in frontier towns, there was a public green, a public square. It was Austin before they had dammed the rivers, so it wasn't really green. But they had a cannon that was always charged. It didn't have a ball for a load, but it was always charged with powder. And it was used as a signaling device. Angelina Eberly saw something, heard something, woke up, looked out, and saw people were loading the archives into wagons to steal them. Frontierswoman, she certainly had a rifle available, but she knew she wasn't going to accomplish it. The one thing that she could do is sound the alarm. So she ran out and fired off the cannon. She fired the cannon that woke everybody up. Everybody gets up, runs out, what's going on, they figure it out. Now the wagons have already rolled out of town, but they're wagons laden with books. The people of Austin, mounted horses, caught up with them very quickly, took them into custody, returned all of the documents to Austin, sent a messenger to Houston to tell Sam Houston that his thieves had been arrested. They were eventually released, but they were, thrown in jail for a while. And that was pretty much the end of the archives war. It was over. It went from politics into physical, trying to steal things. But it all came down to somebody, in this case, a housewife and innkeeper, found something was wrong, realized the only thing she could do was sound the alarm. The appropriate people responded, the crisis was averted. So what I've just said is my alternative to a shitty poster on the subway that says if you see something, say something. That's the power of storytelling. Angelina Everly saved the capital of Texas, and it didn't take an ugly yellow poster. So anyway, talk more better. How you can do better presentations, use storytelling techniques, it's a little bit of everything. As I said, our talks are often different than TED Talks, where you're trying to be inspirational. We can do that too if we need to. Sometimes this is appropriate. This is an actual slide. This is a shot of Chris Hoff's desktop. You'll note that is slide 1 of 99 for a short presentation. For those who've seen Chris Hoff speak, that's slow for him. But in this case, this was a presentation he delivered to some sales engineers at Juniper, where he is now a vice president. Sometimes the job really is to challenge each other. So in some of the technical talks today will be intellectually challenging, and that's cool. But you need to think about whether or not you're really going to make the audience work and whether they're willing to work for that. That's one of the challenges that we have in translating from this audience, or a Black Hat, or DEF CON, or Source audience, or even a local OWASP meeting, where people are willing to put in some effort to learn what we have to show them. Because it's interesting, we're that kind of people. We transition into trying to make these points within a business environment, or we try to reach outside the echo chamber and talk to web developers about security, and they all hate us, often for good reason. Part of it is we're used to going and being absolutely willing, and I want your slide deck when we're done. So you have to think about who the audience is, how hard they're willing to work. I want to thank somebody else. I've not seen his workshop, but for those of you who know Mercurial, if you ever get a chance, he does a great talk on better presentations. We cover some things. I go a little different direction on a lot of things. He also has a workshop on it. I will probably actually be doing a series of workshops where people that are interested in doing things will get together and do short versions of presentations and critique each other within this community. So it's not going to be, Toastmasters, presentation Zen sort of thing. It'll be more far focused on improving your presentation skills, improving our skills. But anyway, Jamie rocks. If you get a chance, see his stuff. So back to that point I was making. All those great books on presentations tell you that it's a presentation, it's not documentation. Write white papers. In a perfect world, we would. But what happens at all of these conferences? They actually force you to provide the decks, RSA, things like that. They want your slide deck. That's used as documentation. There are better ways to do documentation than PowerPoint, but we have this where this culture is built into the deck needs to contain a lot of meat. And there are a couple of ways to deal with that. To provide the content and then focus things back up. But the first point I want to make is when you're doing this, when you're putting a lot of data on the slides, you're fighting your slides. You're looking at the slides in the audience, and you're not focused on you as the presenter. So you're providing insight into what's on the screen. You guys provided a great deal of information, and we're working at the cool, good stuff. And because of personality, you can sometimes draw away. But think about if you really want to make a point, especially to a non-technical audience, you really need to make the screen simpler. The first thing we do is this. We've all seen these slides, and sometimes it's appropriate. But don't read off of them and don't expect people to read off of them. So from a presentation that I've given a few times, I'll put something like this because I want an actual quote. The first thing that I'll do is if I actually want people to understand this quote because I'm using somebody else as a reference, I'll do 1.5 line space so now that you can actually read it. Makes it easier to read on the screen. When you're looking at it on your laptop, it looks like crap because you want it to look dense as you would read it in a document. But that's a little easier to read. But the thing that I usually do is I will pop that up and say, Jesus, that is too many words. That looks like crap. Oh, here's the key point. Now, if you want that blob of text and you grab my deck, you can actually read the full quote. But this is what I want you to think about. And this one just happens to be one of the most depressing things that I've seen lately. This is this year's Trust Wave report, which wasn't a great report. They used a bunch of circular bar charts, which are just absolutely horrible. But this is an interesting statistic. In the IR, in the incident response they did, 63% of their cases, the victims of breach paid somebody to open the hole that got them popped. That's awesome. One of the things that we all learn about business is never outsource your core competency. We can all fail better than somebody else. Never outsource failure. But anyway, back to the topic. So you have a lot of content on there. You know the B button is magic if you're trying to do that. If you're really, especially, you see you're losing the audience because you're deep in the weeds and you want to bring them back to make a point. You hit the B key on your keyboard, or that button you don't know what it does on your presenter. The screen goes blank. The W key will also go white, depending on the environment, what you're using to present on, and whether or not on most. But now, you poor people have to look at me for that, because there's nothing on the screen to entertain you. There's a red circle at the bottom here. This is something that a lot of people are really good at, and a lot of people are really bad at. If you use material from other people, give them credit. If you use images, give them a credit. There's some open source, there's some Creative Commons search tools. If you don't want to pay for licensed images, if you do what I do and you work for a vendor and you do a lot of presentations, somebody just needs to throw down money and go to iStock. I prefer Fotolia because Fotolia is cheaper. But use images that you have a license to use. We're not going to get wound up on a few borrowed images here and there, especially if you throw web credits where due. If you're getting paid to do presentations, if you're doing real keynote-y stuff and you're getting a check for it, make sure you have licenses for everything, because now people will get upset if you're making money. I'm not as wound up as other people are. But let's talk about the deck for a minute. So it's our deck. Let's stack the deck in our favor. Let's not fight our deck. Let's go back to that first little text issue. There's an eye chart for you. Most books, most presentations on this that you see, you will hear the number 24 as the smallest font you should actually use on a slide deck. Sometimes that's not possible. I don't think that's really a hard and fast rule, but there are a couple of great things about 24. You can actually read it. The other thing is using a larger font, getting up to 32 or 40 even, 32 to 36. You can still pack a lot of text on a page, but you can't pack too much. Bigger fonts, especially as captions, force you to think about whether or not you can spread things out. Here's one I've got wrong for this deck, but that's because I default to widescreen now. But this is letterboxed so that it doesn't look so bad. You'll note the bars on the top and bottom. We're used to that because we see things. Modern projectors will often do 16:9, but think about it, if you're doing a presentation somewhere, especially in your offices, and you're using a modern TV, it's going to be widescreen. Make sure it letterboxes or that it looks right. So this is actually wrong here. So I defaulted to that because I do everything in 16:9 because so many places I present are widescreen. Think about it. Yell it. Disarm now. There might be one or two people that remember the SALT II treaty with Brezhnev, but what am I talking about in disarmament? Part of your job when you inherit somebody's slide deck is to disarm, or pretend you're an ER surgeon and see how many bullets you can take out of the presentation. PowerPoint, and Keynote's not quite as bad, but it throws a default template up and you just start pumping stuff in the format that it wants to show you. Don't do that. Think about what format you want to present it. It may be this format. But those bulleted lists, they're not always good. Try to get rid of those bullets. They don't really inform. Sometimes it works, sometimes you need to go there. Here's one from another deck. These 5 images are used in earlier phases of this deck as large images to introduce segments and topics. When I review this, I bring it back to this and I give you a bulleted list. But each image is an image from the prior section. I'm reinforcing that and I'm not using plain bullets. Sometimes they work. I'm not one of those people that thinks you can never use bulleted lists. But think about alternatives. You need a numbered list. So I'll be talking about, one of the things we're doing at Tenable is we're talking about the SANS 20 critical controls. For a lot of businesses that need some help getting the basics covered for information security, the critical controls are pretty good. For those of you that are a little more advanced, you probably wouldn't be interested in starting at these. But if we're talking about a list of 20 things, that's going to be a pretty boring list unless you're a nerd and you grab out your 20-sided dice and number the list using something other than the PowerPoint bulleted list. By the way, I keep talking about PowerPoint. I'm using PowerPoint. If you're a PowerPoint user, PowerPoint 2013 is vastly better than anything before. 2010 was vastly better than anything before that. 2013, somebody at Microsoft, between Office 2010 and Office 2013, somebody at Microsoft bought a Mac and looked at Keynote and then stole presenter view wholesale. So if you're one of those hipsters who uses a Mac, it's okay, but using Keynote doesn't solve these problems for you. Makes it a little easier to do less bad, I would say. And by the way, this will offend some people, but for the love of God, do not use Prezi. Prezi is a web-based knockoff of something called Plex that Microsoft did. It's phenomenal for making people puke. I mean, if you're going to sea, if you are headed to sea and you want to know if your crew is up for rough sailing, do the indoctrination video, do your introductory and safety slides in Prezi, and as it goes swooping around, the people that don't run out green and puking are probably the ones you can count on. Well, first, this is absolutely true and contradictory. What's the point? The point is that if you can find an image to represent something, you should. It's a cliche, but picture's worth 1,000 words. Not all pictures, but a lot of them. But a lot of times, especially when we're talking about technical stuff, there simply isn't an image that works. So don't force it. I sometimes use some really bad visual puns to make a point. One of the recent presentations I've done talks about the importance of being able to track vulnerabilities over time. So I have a picture of railroad tracks over a picture of a clock. It doesn't make the point unless you have a story to back it up, but a lot of times, it's just not an image. It's okay, use words. But think about whether or not, what the best way to present it is. I mean, if you're trying to do a code walk and show people how to solve a problem in Python or C or Assembler or PHP, well, if you're trying to solve a problem in PHP, that's sort of a recursive issue, isn't it? But you gotta have code on the screen. Pictures of Pythons aren't gonna help you solve that. But think about whether or not you're there. Here's a bulleted list that works. This is a stock template from PowerPoint, from Microsoft, but they're not quite boring. This is something that I want to stress, proofread. Yes, there's a typo there. Proofread and practice. Proofread your materials. Have someone else do it. This is a problem that I have is that I want to tune my slides to the last minute. A lot of us do. We're not into the RSA thing where we submit the talk 9 months before we're going to give it, and then it's locked 4 months before. We'll see something or hear something as we're walking in to give the talk and tune the slide. But for the stuff that you've got, the stuff that you can do, let somebody else take a look. They don't have to be technical. They don't have to be fond of you. It could even be your spouse. But another way to find things that don't work, especially if you're alone and rushed, is in your hotel room, in your office, whatever, read your slides out loud to yourself. Force yourself to read them all. It'll help you with timing, but it also will help you find errors, typos, other things that don't work. You'll still make mistakes. You'll get some feedback. It's okay. It's one of those. For those of you that blog, you probably all noticed that like proofreading doesn't work until you hit publish. That's true of text too. Which is an interesting point because we have a desire for new content all the time in information security. Technology in general, but in security. We want the latest. And that means that we want, so if you want to speak at Black Hat, you want to speak at BSides Vegas, you want to speak at RSA, they want new content. ShmooCon wants new content. That's awesome, because we do, and we are willing to put up with a little bit of, oh shit. We're willing to put up with a little bit of demo fail if you back that up with a video. But when you transition into other audiences, they want it to be more polished. If you see people that do, motivational speaking, they're doing a variation of a talk they've been doing for a decade. And it evolves continuously, but it's the same one. And every time they give it, they look at the feedback, and they look at what hit and what missed, and tune it a little bit, tune it a little bit, and tune it a little bit. We don't have that luxury. Events like B-Sides are great because you have a really good presentation that hasn't been seen, too many other places. You can do it here, and then do it somewhere else, or do it somewhere else and here. You can evolve the talks and think about what works and doesn't. But that's something that we run into. Here's another point about the too much data. I could have easily put all of these bullets on one, but rather let's break it up into a couple of pieces. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about practice review, practice in different settings. This laptop is over 5 years old. One of the reasons it's my presentation laptop is because it's convertible. It's a tablet before tablets meant something else and the top spins. There's something weird about these tablets. Any manufacturer, when XP tablet was the thing, the video cards were always great. They weren't like gaming cards, but they would work with any output thing. I love that. But also, now that it's 5 years old, the screen's faded to crap. It replicates a projector in a well-lit room. And so if you've ever seen one of those, and even with that, I've done it when you get an underpowered projector, think about what your stuff's going to look like in a poor situation, overlit with a weak projector. Because there's nothing like putting a lot of effort into a graphic, because an asshole Jack said should use more pictures. So I found a perfect picture, and now people can't see the lolcat. I spent minutes on Google.
Lolcat for a presentation.
Yeah, don't overdo the lolcats. Practice your plan B and C and so on. You have those, right? Jamie Mercurial does a good job of talking about how you work this. If you're doing demos that there's any chance of failure, you probably want to work through in the lab until it works perfect, and then screencast it, and then make sure it plays back right, so you can play that video. We've all seen those where the demo fails, and you're just, well, pretend it works. Yeah, this isn't RSA. We're not on the expo floor talking to vendors. I don't want to pretend it works. So you have those alternate plans. I've got this presentation on SkyDrive. I have it on a thumb drive. So there are a couple different ways I can do it. To our point earlier as we started, if this is your reaction when things go wrong, you need to practice a little bit more until you're comfortable with things not going, because things will go wrong. It's okay, don't freak out. audience. This looks like a marketing team. They're even more attractive than Paul and I. This is about your audience. The audience is sizing you up. You need to know your audience. Well, not biblically know your audience. Well, you know, up to you, whatever. At least after the presentation. It gets awkward before the presentation. Who are they? What do they expect? What motivates them? How hard are they willing to work to get what you have to show them? Do you need to sell them on something, or do they want to learn something from you? Do you have a language barrier, by which I do not necessarily mean foreign languages. You go to Iceland, they have an education system there. They speak English. They're probably okay with us. And they speak Icelandic, which is a language that 1,000+ years old, basically, right? Danish is a modern language compared to Icelandic, but they're but you wonder about your jokes. Your inside jokes don't work so well. They may or may not work so well depending on who it is. The internet and global television has kind of leveled things a bit in the past decade, but still, if I speak in Germany, it makes a difference on what jokes I use. There's some jokes that you pull out when you go to Germany, especially if you were just in France.
I thought if you get your audience like good and liquored up, it doesn't matter. And
That's-
anyway.
That's cheating.
That's success is success. So appearance, here's an interesting one. So we have the dashing, disheveled, handsome, and then just disheveled. Think about what the audience is wearing, what they expect from their peers and others. You don't have to dress like them. You can dress to say, look at me, this is a show, this is entertainment, not just education. But think about what the clothing is. So if you're here or at DEF CON, whatever. You want to screw with people at DEF CON? Go in a suit. You want to screw with people at DEF CON? Shower. No, I strongly encourage showering and deodorant and things like that at DEF CON. But yeah, think about that. Humor. Oh, this is a good one as we laugh, because we like to laugh at ourselves. We like funny presentations. We like to tell jokes. For those of you that are local, you may have heard of Massachusetts 201 CMR 17 data protection law. Went into a couple of years ago. I actually did a lot of work on studying that thing. I read an article about it on some, news site. Wow, that seems stupid. This is before when it was just floated. For those that don't know, the really short version of it, there was a congressman in Massachusetts was trying to get the state to have a breach disclosure law. Got shot down by the business community every time he raised it. And then TJX got popped bad. And the next thing you know, we had a disclosure law. But unlike most of them, it actually said, now you got to come up with regulations so people don't have to disclose breaches so that they head that off. That's what 201 CMR 17 is. So I read one article, it seemed kind of stupid, but I liked the idea that it was stupid. So then I read another article which completely contradicted it. Still stupid. The idea of providing guidance makes sense, but it's still stupid. So I went and I read the actual proposed document. It was all 4 pages. Neither of the other people who wrote about it had read all 4 pages. So someone was wrong on the internet, and I spent a couple of years having to fight that because, how we are, people wrong on the internet. I spoke at all of the public hearings on 201 CMR 17. In one of them, there were probably 50 of us in the room that spoke. I was the only one that got up and said, I work for a security vendor. This will be good for business. I don't care. I'm here as a privacy advocate, as a resident taxpayer of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I think we need to protect ourselves. We wouldn't be here if business hadn't failed. I was the only one with that opinion out of 50 the first time. It was one of 2 out of 50 the second time. It got a little better. There were like 4 of us the last time. But when I introduce myself, I'm normally in this kind of audience. Hi, I'm Jack Gingham. It's not just a name, it's a hobby too. That's the reaction I usually get. Barbara Anthony, Undersecretary for blah blah, was not amused.
Was that her facial reaction?
That is her universal facial reaction. As a matter of fact, never mind. Yeah, Babs and I don't see eye to eye. She didn't want people to know what was going on. There were times when the only place to find the current documents on that were my blog, because I signed up. They knew better than to cut me out of it, so they would email me at 4:55 on a Friday afternoon with the updated, the next rev of proposed stuff. And I would always be on vacation, and I would tell my wife, I'm sorry, I'm going to disappear for an hour, and go fire up a laptop, copy and paste it, throw it up there. They would never update their own site because they didn't want people to know that they had gutted this regulation as they moved through. But anyway, Babs was not amused. This image is interesting. I found this obviously stock photo site. There's something really interesting and terribly wrong with this image. The speaker is in focus, not you, the audience. It's not about me, no matter how silly I look with my stupid top hat and red Asian. It's about trying to share information. Although in this talk, like I said, I am kind of cheating because I'm going to force myself to do better presentations after this because I'm such a damn hypocrite. But ideally, it's about the audience, not about the speaker. So that's the technical side of this. So back to that original one, Angelina Everly, our story. We're storytellers. It's who we are. There are a lot of people in information security who are not very sociable people. We don't always relate together. But then you get us drunk in Paul's basement, or at a cigar lounge, or at DEF CON. We get to, in a room like this, and we see something cool. We see people that are doing cool research. We start talking about it. And the next thing you know, we're having conversations just like real people. Because believe it or not, we are. You may have to get the belt sander and knock a few layers off. And this computer communication is great, but it doesn't actually exist on a human timeline yet. So that storytelling is good. So there are a couple of things to make stories make sense. You need people, places, and events to tie them together. They need to have some reality. Anybody a music major? Paying attention to music? Absolutely basic, fundamental concept in music is tension and release. Think about guitar riffs. Stop them halfway through in your head. Your head will explode. No, you have to finish it. Right? Because most riffs and refrains build tension and relieve tension musically. Storytelling is built on that same idea, but we use different words: character, conflict, and resolution. So the difference is that we have to add this personal element of character to the tension and release. And a lot of times we tell stories which are metaphors for something that a point we're trying to make. And these are really powerful in business environments, but you need to know the limits of metaphors. So I hate reading off of slides, but I'll read this one with you. A good metaphor for life is a man trying to eat soup out of a spaghetti strainer. He goes super fast because he's trying to get the good stuff, but no matter how much he gets, he ends up with a bunch of soup all over his pants, and then he dies of old age eventually. I'm not good at metaphors. Metaphors don't solve all the problems. So everybody here has somewhere along the lines, I bet, had an electronics course. And you've had the guy try to explain electricity in terms of plumbing. And we get voltage, and so you start with a garden hose and bucket and amps and watts. And it's like, if you have an instructor who says, this is wrong, but think about it this way, because it's kind of like that, but it's different. First of all, don't put the electrons in the bucket of water, it hurts. But then you start there and then you take it to an accurate position. But I've actually had an instructor who wanted to use backflush valves that you have to put on your garden hoses and that the town puts on so your house can't backfeed in as diodes. And for those of us that use pressure tanks that have well tanks, the captive air tank, that's a capacitor. No, stop. Don't go that far. If it doesn't work, don't force it. You have to have something that doesn't just like melt people's heads. What the hell is that? I don't know. If you think this makes your point about something other than making sure your shit makes a point, that's wrong. And some things won't work. You're not going to do this in storytelling. Okay? We're not going to do it. Although I brought this up, HD swears he can do it. If anybody can, it's HD. He can also probably read the collected works of the Brothers Grimm in about 32 minutes. He moves a little faster than us. So look for stories. Stories can work into how you found it. Make the story of how you stumbled. You guys are talking about, Krebs and getting swatted, and that's a real person that we all know or know of. It makes it real. It's cool. But look for stories where we are. Here's one a couple of years ago. I was staying in a hotel in San Francisco for RSA, and I looked out and there was this cool building across the street. I got up into my room and I was overlooking that building. So I'd just come off the expo floor. I'm looking at that cool building, what an interesting facade. But then from my room it looks like this. It's all plaster. And it's kind of duct taped up there with braces and all sorts of shit just to kind of make it look like something, but it's just a boring block. There's this huge, pretty facade and nothing but crap sticking it together on the back end. That's not a metaphor for anything on the expo floor at RSA, but it is. So I whip out the phone and start taking pictures. Back to knowing your audience. There are a few of us in the room for whom this is extremely relevant. There are a lot of you for whom it's kind of relevant because your parents and old farts like me won't shut the fuck up about the Cold War. If you're my age, were born when Eisenhower was president, lived in Dallas when Kennedy was assassinated. I have an alibi, I swear to God. My mother says anyway, this is the Berlin Wall, or the remnants of it. And it's interesting to watch people's reaction to this. Because if you grew up during the Cold War, or visited Germany during the separation, not to pick on the other people who are over 29, but, right? That wall is significant. Even as a tourist trap, you kind of like, don't assume that's true for your audience. So if you're going to use stories, use ones that resonate. That was an interesting experience because once I could breathe again, I stepped back to start looking at those stories and see the bored kids, see the people in their 40s to early 50s who were in that transition, who lived through it, whether or not their parents fought the big war. Does it make sense? Also, storytelling is cool, but does it make a difference? Is it actually important to what you're doing? One of the problems we all have is paring down our content. This is a really bad example of it because I'm all over this. But you gotta know what's important and focus on. And if it's not important to the points you're trying to make, you need to weed it out. So if you've got 10 or 15 minutes to make a point in a business environment, which is more common than having an hour to hang out with friends, you really need to pare it down. So as long as we're doing stories, let's tell a story about things. The gentleman in the back, the drummer, his name is not Lucille. Lucille is that guitar. Most of you know that, even if you're not blues fans. Winter of 1949, B.B. King played in a dance hall in Twist, Arkansas. In those days, they were just wooden frame buildings, no heat. The way they heated them was they put a 55-gallon drum half full of kerosene in the middle of the floor and tossed a match in. And fire blew it up, and that provided heat. Two guys started fighting, drinking and fighting. Barrel load goes over. Dance hall up in flames, because there's 20, 30 gallons of lit kerosene spreading across a wooden floor. It was a disaster. Everybody piles out. B.B. King gets outside, realizes the guitar that he just paid $35 for is inside, runs back in, grabs the guitar, gets back out. They get in the car and they drive away. The next day they hear that 2 people died, several were injured. So he talks to people and he discovers that the 2 guys were fighting over a woman. One's name was Lucille. He thought about it and named his guitar Lucille, and every guitar, 35 or so of them since then, that he's had has been named Lucille, to remind him not to ever do anything that stupid again in life. Because he needs a Lucille. He needs a guitar. He doesn't need that one. It's a very verbose way of saying, take out the crap that doesn't matter in your presentation. So, we're talking about storytelling. I'll give you a couple more stories. You can steal these because this isn't my story. Good job, Paul. Good job.
Hold on, that was the wrong one. Wait, it's this one.
Okay. So I've told this story before. I haven't quite got the telling of the story right. Peter Ross tells it a lot better because it's his story. Peter Ross was a blacksmith. He was a master blacksmith. He was the master blacksmith at Colonial Williamsburg for many years. He does better traditional blacksmithing than anyone you'll ever see because at Colonial Williamsburg, they don't have a belt sander, grinder, MIG welder in the back room. They do it all traditional style. That means you weld everything in the front, you heat it and weld it on the anvil. When he had been at Williamsburg a few years, they brought him a lock. This style, you can see there are actually a couple of machine pieces here, so I'm cheating, but I know the forge that made this lock too. Oh, that's actually one of his. That's right, I found a picture of one of his locks. You'll note there's a credit for his website where that image came from. They came to him with a lock very similar to this, except period specific to one of the original houses at Colonial Williamsburg, which had been moved there. And they needed a duplicate because one of the doors had been damaged century plus before and didn't have a lock in it. So they wanted a duplicate because they were renovating this house and it had to be perfect. And so here is a lock that was made in the colonies in the 17th century with scrap metal and had a key, and the other side of the room had to be keyed alike. Had to be right. The other side of the house, we have one key. So he took it apart, piece by piece, very carefully, measured every piece, made diagrams, mastered, you just absolutely, yeah. Premature clickage there. That happens with old age. So I was just beating you to it. So he then assembled each of the pieces. He made an exact duplicate of every one of these pieces. And he goes to the metal pile that they've got, and he puts it in the fire, and he hits it with a hammer, and he files and grinds, files and cuts, and chisels, until all of the pieces measure the same as the other one. He puts it together, couldn't even assemble it. Starts filing and hammering and filing and hammering, reworking everything. Finally gets it all together. A little more filing and hammering, it all works. He's really proud of himself. And he's showing it like kids showing stuff to mom and dad when they come home from school. You know, the stuff that has to go on the refrigerator. Instead of the refrigerator, it was the bench every time he went to the Colonial room. Did you see this? Did you see this? A couple of weeks later, he came in after a couple of days off. He picked them up and looked at them and said, "No, that's the original. Yeah, that's it. Here's mine." You know what? Man, there's a lot of tool marks on that. You can see where I had to move holes. That's one of the cool things with forging. You heat the metal up, make it thinner on one side, thicker on the other side. You actually can move a hole around. But you can tell because you've stretched the metal. You rework it, it's like, ah. That's why I had this conversation. Apparently, they were just better than we are. That's all they did. They grew up with it, 7, 8 years old. They started, working as apprentices. They were just better than the other. It took him many years to have this other revelation. They worked with the material they had, and it was always scrap. They didn't have machine tools. They didn't have a lathe. They didn't have a CNC machine. They would make one piece. They would start with the back, the big solid piece that's the foundation it's built on. They would make the next piece. It had to fit that piece. They'd make the third piece. It had to fit the first two. And they would build all the way up until they got to the point where the lock mechanism had to be the same. Then it'd take a little fiddling inside. It wasn't really visible, but the key was that it was, yeah, that looks like that. That doesn't look like that. Close enough. I mean, when you're stuffing it into a wooden door that you've hand-hewn, that was fine. And the key had to work, so the fiddly bits, you did some filing, which I always did filing for fiddly bits. The key is that it all has to work together. I wish this slide deck worked together because I'm covering a bunch of different topics, but the idea is that you have an idea that you're trying to present. And what you add to that needs to work with the rest of it. Don't make machine things and expect things to fit together, because you're building something that's not a machined thing. This is a crafted piece. Again, in a technical talk, that's not always true, but this is a crafted piece. This is not a machined piece. Do I want to tell this? Do I want to subject you guys to this? I do. So here we go. Something you're unlikely to ever do in a technical talk. But you may have to do if you're trying to move people. People have heard, I like to use quotes from people and build on stories to move people. One of Isaac Newton is one of the people that I like to talk about, and I've done some things with this. But I want to talk about somebody else. Isaac Newton has some fantastic quotes. But I want to talk about this guy. What we're talking about is moving people to act. So again, if you give them a cool demo of something, they're going to want to go home and play with it. But if you're in a different environment, you really need to move people. This is actually, getting a little moralistic, but it's okay. This is Philip Simmons. He passed away, Mr. Simmons passed a couple of years ago. He was born June 9th in 1912 in Wanda. For those familiar with the low country in South Carolina, that's Daniel Island, not far from Charleston. He was raised by his grandparents till he was about 8 years old. When he went to live with his mother in the city in Charleston, had to take a ferry, there were no bridges. And he enrolled in the first class to school, it's still there, called the Buick School. As he walked to and from school, he walked past things along the shipyards. He walked past businesses, all of the craftsmen that sprung up around the waterfront. Well, even here in this day and age, when you go to the waterfront in communities around here, in Providence, in Newport, you won't find, in Fall River in New Bedford, it's very clear. You find the remnants of all of these businesses. And the craftsman intrigued him, but as the blacksmith shop, it really intrigued him. He would come back to talk to the people as he went home from school. He would talk to people all along the shipyard. But it was always the blacksmith shop that he came back to. And he made a career out of it because he was attracted to the ringing of the iron, the work, the fact that they were making things happen. And he got in at the very tail end of shipwrighting and wagon wheels for wagons. He evolved his craftsmanship through all of this and evolved with the trade. Ended up being an auto body guy because that was where metalwork went. But he always did a little bit of ornamental stuff. And in his older age, there was a resurgence as Charleston became a tourist mecca. People started having money. They wanted a lot of things built and rebuilt. And he did a lot of ornamental and architectural stuff. Always was a just devout member of his church, which is not relevant to this, even though it sounds like it is, but a member of the community. Mentored more people than they can count. And he was a generous and deeply religious man, but you can have as little religious belief as somebody like me, and I think his favorite saying are words to live by. This is what he believed, and this is what he lived. And as a devout atheist, I can tell you I can't come up with anything much better for a way to move forward in life than if you want your prayers answered, get up off your knees and hustle. So, that was a little, I don't know, moralistic or whatever, but you know, sometimes there are things that you want to make happen and you just have to make them happen. And that's what B-Sides are about. We make stuff happen. And that's my spiel. I appreciate you guys hanging out with me this morning. My shameless self-promotion, but most of you can figure out how to find me. I'm not hard to find. I'm not a very subtle person. And I appreciate it, and if you've got feedback, I would appreciate that. And with that, so I have to say it one more time, I guess, while I have the microphone on. You'll be old someday too, if you're lucky.